At OKGrow, we specialize in JavaScript consulting and training, especially React, GraphQL, and Meteor. We recorded this live at one of our GraphQL Fundamentals training classes in November 2016. Things change quickly, and we might have done a new version since then, so for the most recent version, or to start at the first video in the series, visit okgrow.com/GraphQL video.
Okay, welcome to GraphQL Fundamentals. I'm Robert Dickert here from OKGrow. We have a few prerequisites that we want to go through just so that you have the right setup. You'll want to make sure you install Meteor. You won't have to know anything about Meteor to do this workshop, but our demo app is installed on Meteor, so you'll need it to be able to install it. You'll want to have access to Git and make sure you have accounts set up with GitHub and Trello, and we'll make sure that you have the information you need to set up your app. There are some training prep notes that you'll want to make sure that you have access to and that you've gone through that will relate to this. And you will also want to have a look at the repo, get that cloned, and we'll help you to get that set up. We won't get into that until the second half of the class, but it'll be necessary in order to work on client-side stuff. So without further ado, I guess we'll get started on the actual training. Today we're going to talk about GraphQL. I'm going to start with how to be a good consumer of GraphQL. There is a lot to know, actually. It's very intuitive technology, but there are also some things built on top of it that if you understand them, you'll have a much better time getting around the APIs that are out there right now, and in terms of also building your own. And once we've learned really how GraphQL works and how to consume it on the web, we will actually build our own API with our own schema, own resolve functions, and then we will learn how to consume that from a client. So who are we? We are OKGrow. We are a JavaScript shop. We build web and mobile applications for our clients. We also do training and design sprints and everything you might need to get your business started on the web. So let's talk about what GraphQL is. Sometimes people get it confused with something like SQL. It's pretty different. It's actually an application layer, and it is a query language that sits on your server and helps you to have a standard interface that communicates to all of your backends, whether those be databases or other REST APIs or any other kind of I/O source. The best way to think of it is as an alternative to REST. So whereas if you look at REST interfaces, often every REST interface, even if it's really well documented, you'll find that you have to look at the documentation for that particular interface in order to be able to use it. So if you look at GitHub or Trello, you have to actually look at their docs, and there's no other way to consume it. You'll see that with GraphQL, you almost don't need documentation, and that it really standardizes between different providers. So a more literal way to think of what GraphQL is this description of a type system with a query language. So really, you're talking about how is my data structured, what is the type of each individual element, and then how can I access all those elements. So, and the last one I believe came from Facebook itself. A query language for APIs, a runtime for fulfilling those queries with your existing data. So it's a little more detailed. So one of the main points of GraphQL is for you to be able to present your data in a way that's easy to consume by clients. So the people who are writing your client code don't have to know what's happening on the back end. They can specify exactly the data that they need in a format that looks a lot like JSON, where they will be able to then ask for that information and expect to receive it without having to know what's on the back end. So everything's really uniform. You can integrate all kinds of different data sources, and those data sources can all be integrated in a single request, so you don't have a bunch of round trips happening. Another thing that makes GraphQL so powerful is that it is introspective. So we'll see as we get into it, we'll very quickly see how it's very easy to discover what is available in a GraphQL interface. So this is specifically designed to handle some of the challenges with REST. We've talked about this actually already. REST data, you often have to query the endpoint multiple times to get the information that you need. Each one has its own different way of accessing it. It's also difficult to know how people are using your API. If you put something out on a REST API, you don't know what portions of that API they're using. Like usually the API will have, you may have like 20 or even 100 things that are available on the API, and you don't know which ones are being used. So when it comes to time for you to change that API, you're not in a good position to be able to shrink it. It's easy to grow an API, but it's hard to take things away because you don't know which clients you may be breaking. So there's a problem with overfetching where you're just getting more data than you actually need, and GraphQL takes care of that. So let's get started with GraphQL right away. I think it's easiest to understand GraphQL in the context of actually trying to use it. So we're going to go immediately into exercise 1. These exercises, we're going to use things that are available to anyone on the net. So it's really easy to get started. There's an API on the web called the Star Wars API where you can actually search for information about your favorite characters and places in the Star Wars universe. A guy named Lee Byron put together a GraphQL interface for that, and we're going to look at that right now to start to learn how to use GraphQL. If we click on the link in the slides, we will end up in an app that we're going to use over and over again today called Graphical. This is an interface that was designed to help you to navigate around GraphQL interfaces, and if we'll find that that we can learn a lot just by taking a look at what's available. This has auto-completion. If I hit, oh, and you guys will probably want to go to this URL. So it's basically GraphQL-swappy.parseapp.com will get you there, or you can search for GraphQL Swappy, and you'll find it. It's the parse app one. When you go in here, you can start a query with these curly braces, and then if I hit Control Space, it gives me a list of all the things that I can look at here. I'm going to go to, I don't know, I'll go to All Planets, and within Planets, I'm going to see what I have. I can go look at the planets within All Planets. We'll talk about like why it's structured that way a little bit later, but it has to do with pagination. And then within that, I can look at, say, the name. And at this point, if I hit Command Enter, it runs the query. So here you can see that I have gone to the All Planets query and searched for the name. And here are the names of all of the planets that you can find. And if I want to add other things to it, here I can hit Control Space again, and there are all these things that I can learn about all these planets. Now here's the thing called Film Connection. This is another interesting feature. If I go deeper into this, and I'm going to have to go into the Films connection, and if I go to Title is Good, and I tell it to hit Search, now my list is hitting for each planet. It'll tell me what films it appeared in. So Tatooine appeared in 5 out of the 6. It only has 6 of the movies in it, so it has 5 out of the 6. But like Alderaan only occurs in Episode 4, where it gets blown up, and in Revenge of the Sith. So what you can see in our queries here is that we've made a query that looks a lot like a JSON object. You have planets and then name, and it's sort of like we're asking for the values. We've given the keys of the JSON array, and the response will have the key as well as the value. And this is the promise of GraphQL. It's a very intuitive way to go find the data that you need. And so when we go back to our exercise, your mission now is to find a way to list all the movies in the database, and also answer this very specific question just by observation: what is RTD2's home planet? So with that, we'll pause the video and let you guys work.